The story we're told is straightforward. The 1870s were a time of industrial expansion. Cities grew, railways spread, and architecture evolved to meet the demands of a modernizing world. Buildings were constructed for the needs of their time, designed around the technologies available in that decade. But when you examine the blueprints, something doesn't align. Structures completed between 1870 and 1879 contain infrastructure for electrical systems that wouldn't be standardized until 1895. They include ventilation capacities suited for urban populations that wouldn't exist for another 30 years. And they feature load-bearing frameworks engineered to specifications that match early 20th century standards, not 1870s construction norms. The gap isn't small. It's decades. And it appears across multiple cities, in buildings with no shared architects, constructed by separate contractors, following different municipal codes. This is a documentary exploration of architectural timing. The evidence discussed here is drawn from public records, construction archives, and historical urban planning documents. No claims are made about intent or coordination. The purpose is observation, not conclusion. What follows is an examination of what was built, when it was built, and what it seemed to anticipate. The capacity problem. In 1876, Philadelphia hosted the Centennial Exposition. The main exhibition hall was the largest building in the world at the time, covering over 20 acres under a single roof. But its design included features that made little sense for 1876. The structure incorporated conduit channels through its floors and walls, spaces explicitly designated for future wiring. But in 1876, electric lighting was still experimental. Edison's first viable incandescent bulb wouldn't emerge until 1879, and even then, it would take another decade before electrical distribution became practical. The hall also included mechanical ventilation shafts calibrated for internal heat loads far exceeding what gas lighting or steam machinery would produce. The capacity was designed for electric lighting and electric-powered equipment, technologies that wouldn't be common in public buildings until the 1890s. The official explanation is forward-thinking design. Architects anticipated future needs and built flexibility into the structure. But the channels weren't generic. They were dimensioned to specific wire gauges. The ventilation wasn't oversized, it was precise. The load calculations matched systems that didn't yet have names. The timing across borders. In 1877, the Royal Albert Hall in London underwent internal renovations. The updates included structural reinforcements to support equipment that didn't exist yet. Specifically, the ceiling framework was reinforced to bear loads consistent with modern stage lighting rigs, not the gas chandeliers in use at the time. The same year, the old Executive Office Building in Washington, D.C., now known as the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, was completed. Its design included over 2 miles of hollow casings embedded in the walls. These were labeled as future service channels in construction documents. Again, electrical infrastructure wouldn't be installed in government buildings for another 15 years. The channels were built in 1877. The question isn't whether architects planned ahead. The question is how they planned with such specificity for systems that hadn't been invented yet. The infrastructure before the grid. By 1878, over 40 major public buildings across the United States and the United Kingdom had been completed with embedded electrical conduit infrastructure. This occurred before the first central power station opened in 1882. The conduits weren't symbolic. They were functional, grounded, insulated, and routed according to principles that would later become standardized electrical code. But in 1878, those codes didn't exist. The buildings also shared another feature: reserve capacity. Water mains were oversized. Sewage systems were built for populations 2 to 3 times larger than the cities they served. Structural frameworks exceeded the weight requirements of the materials and machinery available at the time. This is typically explained as Victorian over-engineering, a cultural preference for grandeur and durability. But over-engineering implies excess without function. These systems weren't decorative. They were calibrated. The reserve margins align almost exactly with early 20th century municipal planning standards, standards that wouldn't be formalized until decades later. The cross-regional consistency. What makes this pattern notable isn't just the presence of early infrastructure, it's the consistency. In Manchester, the town hall completed in 1877 includes service tunnels beneath the building dimension to the same specifications as those in the Philadelphia City Hall, completed in 1901. The tunnels weren't designed for contemporary needs. They matched future municipal utility standards. In Boston, the Old South Church, finished in 1875, contains vertical shafts through its masonry walls. The shafts are sealed but structured to allow future insertion of wiring or piping. The dimensions match standards published by the National Electric Code in 1897. The church was built 22 years earlier. These aren't isolated decisions by visionary architects. This is systematic anticipation across multiple cities, appearing simultaneously in the same decade, following design principles that wouldn't be codified until the turn of the century. The scale suggests something beyond individual foresight. It suggests preparation. But preparation for what, and based on what knowledge, remains open. The infrastructure exists. The dates are verified. The gap between construction and utilization is measurable. What isn't clear is how builders in the 1870s knew what the 1920s would need. The pattern becomes more difficult to dismiss when you examine the transportation networks. Between 1870 and 1880, the United States constructed over 70,000 miles of railway track. That's an average of 7,000 miles per year, more than any decade before or after. But the railways weren't built to connect existing population centers. They were built ahead of them. The routes passed through territories with populations under 5,000. They included stations in towns that didn't exist yet. And they featured infrastructure, water towers, maintenance depots, freight terminals, scaled for traffic volumes that wouldn't materialize until the early 1900s. The official narrative calls this speculative development. Railroads were built to encourage settlement, not respond to it. But speculation implies uncertainty. These routes weren't experimental. They were precise. The Erie Canal expansion. In 1873, New York State began a massive expansion of the Erie Canal. The project widened the canal, deepened the locks, and reinforced the embankments to handle larger vessels. At the time, the canal was underutilized. Traffic had declined for nearly a decade as railroads absorbed freight. Expansion seemed economically irrational. Yet the work proceeded. And the specifications reveal something unexpected. The new lock dimensions weren't based on the ships in use in 1873. They were based on vessel sizes that would become standard in the 1890s. The canal was widened to accommodate barges that didn't exist yet, but would exist in almost exact dimensions 20 years later. The expansion also included drainage systems engineered for water flow rates far exceeding the canal's documented usage. The capacity matched industrial-era runoff levels, not agricultural-era levels, which were the norm in the 1870s. The question remains, how did engineers in 1873 calculate specifications for industrial runoff patterns that wouldn't emerge until after the turn of the century? The storage facilities. In 1875, grain elevators began appearing across the American Midwest. These weren't small warehouses. They were industrial-scale storage complexes, some exceeding 10 stories in height, built in towns with populations under 3,000. The elevators were designed with capacities that dwarfed local production. A facility in Kansas, completed in 1877, could store over 500,000 bushels of grain. The surrounding county produced less than 100,000 bushels annually. It would take until 1905 for regional production to match the elevator's capacity. The same pattern appeared in the United Kingdom. Warehouses built along the Thames between 1874 and 1878 included reinforced flooring, loading docks, and rail sidings designed for cargo volumes that exceeded London's import totals by a factor of 3. The structures weren't expandable. They were built at full capacity from the start. And that capacity aligned with early 20th century trade volumes, not 1870s commerce. The administrative synchronization. What makes the infrastructure notable isn't just the scale, it's the standardization. Between 1870 and 1880, dozens of cities across the United States and the United Kingdom adopted nearly identical administrative systems. Record-keeping formats, municipal codes, and public works standards appeared simultaneously in regions with no direct communication. Boston's 1875 Public Works Manual uses the same terminology, measurements, and procedural guidelines as Manchester's 1876 manual. The documents weren't copied. They were developed independently, yet they align almost exactly. The same applies to fire codes, building permits, and sanitation regulations. Cities separated by an ocean implemented the same policies in the same year, using the same language. This is typically explained as professional exchange. Engineers and planners shared ideas through journals and conferences. But the speed and precision suggest something more coordinated. These weren't gradual adoptions. They were simultaneous implementations. And they appeared in a single decade. The grid systems. In 1878, New Haven, Connecticut, installed a citywide gas distribution network. The pipes were oversized, designed for flow rates 3 times higher than the city's gas consumption. The layout included junction points and pressure regulators spaced according to principles that wouldn't be standardized until electric and gas utilities merged in the 1890s. The grid wasn't built for gas alone. It was built to be convertible. The same year, Birmingham, England, completed a water distribution system with similar characteristics. The mains were wider than necessary, the pressure thresholds were set higher than current demand required, and the network included shut-off valves positioned at intervals matching future electric grid substations. The grids weren't provisional. They were anticipatory. By 1880, over 30 cities in the United States and the United Kingdom had installed utility grids with capacities exceeding their population's needs by 50 to 200%. The excess wasn't uniform, it was calibrated. Each city's grid matched the population density it would reach between 1910 and 1920. Not earlier. Not later. The projections were accurate to within a decade. The rail station phenomenon. Railway stations built in the 1870s contain some of the most explicit examples of anticipatory design. London Street Pancras Station, completed in 1868 but expanded in 1876, includes platform sheds with roof trusses engineered to support loads far exceeding the weight of steam locomotives. The calculations match the weight and dimensions of electric locomotives, which wouldn't be introduced in the UK until 1890. Grand Central Depot in New York, completed in 1871 and expanded throughout the 1870s, features underground passages and support columns designed for multi-level track systems. The structure anticipated the 1913 electrification and expansion, 40 years in advance. These weren't vague allowances for future growth. The dimensions were specific. The placements were exact. The infrastructure was built for systems that didn't exist yet, but would exist in configurations that matched the original designs almost precisely. The compounding evidence. Taken individually, each example might be dismissed as coincidence or exceptional foresight. But the examples aren't isolated. They appear across industries, railways, canals, grain storage, utilities, public buildings, and across regions in the same decade following the same logic. The pattern is the same. Infrastructure built ahead of demand, calibrated to future specifications and accurate to within years. The timing is the same, the 1870s. The geography is the same, primarily the United States and the United Kingdom with scattered examples across Europe. And the gap is the same, a lag of 20 to 50 years between construction and utilization. This isn't a theory. It's a documentation of what was built when it was built and what it seemed to expect. Whether this reflects inheritance, convergence, or coordination is a question the evidence doesn't answer. But the evidence does ask the question. And in asking, it opens the door to a label that has recently re-emerged in historical discussion. A term used in 19th century maps, repurposed in modern interpretation, and now applied to exactly this kind of timing discrepancy. The term is Tartaria. And what it describes, or suggests, depends entirely on how you interpret the infrastructure that remains. The word Tartaria first appeared on European maps in the 15th century. It was a geographical label, used to describe the vast, loosely defined regions of Central Asia and Siberia that lay beyond the familiar borders of Europe and the Ottoman Empire. The term had no political unity. It referred to territories, not a civilization. By the 19th century, the label had faded from use. Modern nation-states replaced vague regional names. Tartaria became a historical footnote. But in recent years, the term has been repurposed, not as geography but as interpretation. The modern reinterpretation. In contemporary discussion, Tartaria has come to represent a framework for examining architectural and infrastructural anomalies that appear concentrated in the 19th century. It's not a claim of a lost empire. It's a lens through which timing discrepancies, over-engineered systems, and cross-regional consistency are observed. The interpretation varies depending on who's using it. Some view Tartaria as a metaphor for inherited infrastructure, systems built by earlier, unrecorded phases of development that were later repurposed or attributed to the civilizations that occupied them. Others interpret it as evidence of coordinated global planning, a centralized effort to build infrastructure ahead of publicly acknowledged need, suggesting knowledge of future population and industrial patterns. And still others use the term more literally, proposing that a technologically advanced society existed in the 18th or early 19th century, built much of the infrastructure we attribute to the Victorian era, and was then erased or absorbed into the historical record we accept today. None of these interpretations are proven. All of them are attempts to explain the same evidence. Three lenses, same data. The infrastructure remains constant across all three interpretations. The 1870s buildings with electrical conduits, the railways built for populations that hadn't arrived, the grain elevators scaled beyond regional production, the utility grids calibrated to future demand. These are not disputed facts. They are documented in public records, construction archives, and municipal planning documents. What differs is the explanation. The inherited infrastructure model suggests we're looking at remnants, systems built earlier than official records indicate, possibly during periods of development that weren't fully documented. This would explain the timing gap. The infrastructure wasn't anticipatory, it was pre-existing. The coordinated planning model suggests a level of centralized foresight that exceeded what individual cities or nations would have possessed. It implies shared knowledge, shared standards, and shared timelines implemented across continents within a narrow window. The literal Tartaria model suggests the infrastructure wasn't built by the societies we credit. It was built by a predecessor civilization, and later claimed or integrated into the historical narrative of the 19th century. Each model addresses the evidence. None fully resolves it. The return to 1816. There's one additional detail worth noting. The year 1816 is known historically as the year without a summer. A volcanic eruption in Indonesia caused global climate disruption. Crops failed. Populations migrated. Economic systems collapsed. But 1816 is also the point where certain kinds of records become dramatically more detailed. Census data becomes more precise. Infrastructure documentation becomes more systematic. Architectural drawings become standardized. It's as though the administrative apparatus of the modern state emerged suddenly, fully formed, in the years immediately following 1816. Some interpret this as recovery, a response to crisis that accelerated bureaucratic development. Others interpret it as replacement, a new system overlaying or succeeding an older one. The records themselves don't clarify which interpretation is correct. They simply mark a threshold. Before 1816, documentation is sparse. After 1816, it's comprehensive. And the infrastructure built in the decades following 1816, particularly in the 1870s, carries the characteristics we've been examining: anticipatory design, overcapacity, cross-regional consistency. The metaphor and the evidence. Tartaria, in its modern use, functions less as a historical claim and more as a placeholder, a term that acknowledges something unresolved in the infrastructural record. It doesn't demand belief in a hidden civilization. It doesn't require acceptance of conspiracy. It simply names the gap between what was built and when it was needed. The buildings exist. The railways exist. The grids exist. The timing is measurable. The specifications are documented. What remains open is the question of intent, knowledge, and coordination. The evidence invites examination. It resists singular explanations. And it leaves room for multiple interpretations, all of which acknowledge the same underlying reality. The 1870s produced infrastructure that seemed to know what was coming. Whether that knowledge came from foresight, inheritance, or something else entirely is a question the architecture itself cannot answer. But it asks the question clearly. And in asking, it refuses to disappear.